Some stories aren't just about a single event. They become a fault line, a moment that changes an entire nation forever. Today, we're diving into a case that did exactly that. A crime that didn't just make headlines, but actually ignited a movement and forced a country to look in the mirror and confront some really deep issues.
Some moments in history are so profound you can pinpoint them to a single day. And for millions of people in India and really all around the world, this is one of those dates, a day that truly marks a before and an after.
So what exactly happened? Well, it all started on what should have been a totally ordinary evening, on a private bus moving through the streets of South Delhi. But it would end in an act of just unimaginable brutality.
Okay, so the timeline of the attack is just stark and brutal. It began with a 23-year-old physiotherapy student and her friend doing something simple, just getting on a bus. But on that bus, they were attacked by 6 men. The assault was horrific, and afterwards, they were just thrown from the moving vehicle. She fought for her life for nearly 2 weeks and was even flown to Singapore for specialized treatment, but the young woman tragically died from her injuries on December 29th.
You can imagine the sheer horror of this crime sparked an immediate and really intense investigation. The public was demanding answers, and the pressure was on to find the people responsible for this absolutely heinous act.
And they did. The investigation pretty quickly zeroed in on 6 individuals who were on that bus: the driver, a cleaner, and 4 other men. They were all taken into custody pretty swiftly.
But the path to justice wasn't the same for all 6 of them. 4 of the adult men were eventually convicted and sentenced to death. A 5th, the bus driver, was found dead in his jail cell. It was reported as a suicide. And then there was the 6th person accused, who was a minor at the time. He was tried as a juvenile, ended up serving 3 years in a reform facility, and was then released.
So, the arrests? That was really just the beginning. It kicked off this long and incredibly public legal battle that would captivate and, at times really frustrate the entire country.
The initial trial, at least, moved fast. To deal with the public demand for swift justice, the case was put into a fast-track court. And by September of 2013, so less than a year after the attack, the 4 remaining adult accused were found guilty on all charges, including murder and gang rape.
To justify giving the death penalty, the court used this very specific, incredibly powerful legal phrase, rarest of rare. It was basically a declaration that this crime went so far beyond the pale, and it just captured the nation's horror in those 3 words.
But that verdict was nowhere near the final chapter. For over 7 years, the case just wound its way through the legal system. The convicts used every single legal avenue they had: appeals, reviews, mercy petitions to the President of India. Finally, after all of those options were totally exhausted, the 4 men were executed in March 2020.
But the impact of this case wasn't just happening inside the courtroom. While that whole legal battle was playing out, something absolutely incredible was happening on the streets. The case had struck a nerve, and the public response was unlike anything anyone had seen before. This was a true awakening. We're talking about massive, spontaneous protests erupting not just in Delhi, but all across the country. People from every walk of life were holding candlelight vigils, demanding justice, and calling for real, systemic change. The case drew global media attention, putting a huge spotlight on the issue of violence against women in India.
And all that public pressure? It had a direct, tangible result. The government actually responded by passing the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013. And this was a huge piece of legislation. It widened the definition of sexual assault and brought in much, much stricter punishments for offenders.
And it wasn't just legal changes. There was a big financial commitment, too. The government set up something called the NIRBHAYA Fund. This was a fund of 1,000 crore rupees, that's about $120 million US, specifically dedicated to funding projects aimed at making women safer.
So, what's the lasting impact? Years after the protests have died down and the legal case is closed, the legacy of this story keeps evolving. And it's a legacy that's tied to a single, powerful name. So Indian law prohibits naming victims of sexual assault, so the media gave her a pseudonym, Nirbhaya. In Hindi, it means fearless. And the name it stuck. She became this powerful symbol, not of victimhood, but of courage and the nationwide fight for women's rights and safety.
At the very heart of this fight were her parents, especially her mother, Asha Devi. Her tireless, relentless quest for justice for her daughter turned her into a major national voice for victims' rights. And this quote from her just captures her mission perfectly, that this was never, ever just about one case.
And that brings us to today, because while the Nirbhaya case led to some undeniable legal and social shifts, a lot of activists and observers argue that the work is far from over. They point to the fact that violence against women still persists as proof that just changing laws doesn't automatically change a culture. That systemic change, they say, is still very much a work in progress.
So, we're left with this crucial question. The case of Nirbhaya led to new laws, a dedicated fund, and a national conversation. The perpetrators were brought to justice. But has it truly made the country safer for women? Well, that's the complex, challenging legacy of this turning point, and it's a question the nation is still grappling with today.